Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into the frosty, smelly, and utterly unpredictable world of being a medieval lord, because nothing says royalty like waking up with a backache caused by a mattress that's basically a bag of straw older than your great great grandpappy's beard. You probably won't survive this day without at least one scorch mark or an existential crisis induced by a rooster. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's joining this royal nightmare in real time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken in your cold stone chamber, the kind of room that seems to have been designed specifically to remind you that despite all your titles and lands, you're still very much at the mercy of medieval architecture. The stone walls radiate a chill that seeps through your linen tunic, coaxing goosebumps to march down your arms like tiny soldiers staging a protest. Your bed? Oh, the bed is a grand spectacle of discomfort, a wooden frame barely holding together, a sack stuffed with straw harvested last season, and possibly last century. If you were lucky, the straw was at least somewhat dry. If not, well, you might wake up with an unexpected souvenir, a medieval mattress rash. Yes, that was a real thing, and doctors of the time had remedies for injuries caused by bedding. Imagine explaining to the local healer that your mattress attacked you. It struck again last night, right as I was falling asleep. If you're the type who grumbles about your memory foam being too soft or too firm, just remember, nobles like you got the luxury of a wooden frame supporting that bag of straw. It's like having the privilege to be uncomfortable on a slightly elevated level. Forget adjustable beds or soothing pillows. Tonight's bedtime luxury was a stone slab, or a pile of rough wool blankets, the medieval equivalent of cuddling a sheep that just rolled through a thorn bush. Suddenly your peace is shattered by the medieval alarm clock. There's no gentle chime to coax you awake, no rise and shine playlist or motivational podcast. Instead, the castle's designated wakey person is already on patrol, hollering from the halls with a voice loud enough to wake the dead, or at least the slightly annoyed servants. Historical records from the 13th century actually mention this position a job so universally hated that you'd swear it was designed as medieval torture. You can almost hear the disgruntled servants, plotting a subtle revenge perhaps, by stealthily hiding the poor alarm raiser's boots. Or maybe it's the rooster who, after a particularly existential crisis at dawn, crows so loudly and erratically, you wonder if it's questioning its entire purpose in life. You stumble out of bed realizing that your kingdom of stone is less a warm fortress and more a giant refrigerator. Insulation, huh? The only thing insulating you from the cold is the fact that you're still wearing yesterday's clothes. Medieval folks didn't waste time with pajamas. If you wanted to survive the night without turning into a human popsicle, you simply stayed in what you wore. But wait, there's a twist. Some of the clever nobles had servants who'd warm their beds using pans filled with hot coals. It sounds delightful until you realise the hazard. One nobleman famously ended up with a scorched backside thanks to an over-enthusiastic servant, proving that medieval bed warming was a risky business indeed. You could say the stakes were literally hot. As you brace yourself against the cold, you feel the scratchiness of your wool blanket, a prized possession that was so valuable it often made its way into wills and dowries. Yes, you might inherit your great-aunt's itchy blanket, along with the family title, which definitely puts sleep tight in a new light. Looking around, you notice the bedroom windows aren't the glorious stained glass you'd expect from fairy tales, but narrow slits meant more for archers than sunlight. This means your mornings often begin in pitch darkness, unless you're lucky enough to have a candle, or less lucky, and stub your toe on the chamber pot. Speaking of which, the chamber pot might just be the most versatile medieval household item. You'll be getting acquainted with it soon. Historians still argue whether the discomfort and cold were a product of bad design or a cunning strategy to keep the nobility hardy and alert. Either way, your first challenge of the day is to survive the cold, the dark, and the sudden wake-up calls without losing your royal dignity or your temper. Now that you've endured the grand awakening, it's time to face the medieval morning routine, a ritual that blends hygiene dressing and a touch of medieval chaos. A topic will unravel in the next section as you prepare to present yourself to your subjects, hopefully, without any scorched spots or mysterious stains. You probably thought getting dressed today was a pain, right? Well, welcome to medieval fashion hell, where every outfit is a labyrinth of layers, laces, and lords in distress. Imagine waking up still shivering from the stone-cold chamber, only to realise your clothes are as frozen and stiff as the castle moat in January. Your morning hygiene routine. Let's just say it's less refreshing shower and more strategic cold water dunk, with the enthusiasm of a reluctant cat. First, there's the bucket of water. No taps, no hot showers, no fancy temperature controls. Just a metal bucket filled with water so cold it could freeze your noble toes right off. The bucket sits there, menacingly mocking your dignity, waiting for you to plunge your hands in and pretend that doesn't feel like dipping into an ice cave. If you thought your morning routine was tough, try scrubbing yourself clean with soap made from wood ash and animal fat. Yes, that's right, your version of luxury soap smells suspiciously like a campfire gone wrong, and you're basically rubbing fireplace drippings all over yourself. For the select few who can afford it, there's Castile soap, which uses olive oil instead of animal fat and costs roughly the same as a whole sheep. So if you fancy smelling like a freshly shorn ewe instead of a slightly less fragrant campfire, you better make sure your treasury is well stocked. Historians still argue whether this soap actually cleaned people or just masked the natural aroma of medieval life, which was somewhere between wet dog and ancient barnyard. Once you've endured the icy baptism, it's time to tackle the dressing ceremony. Now you don't just throw on a shirt and call it a day. No, noble attire is an elaborate affair involving a dizzying array of tunics, cloaks, belts, and if you're a lady, enormous skirts so heavy you might need a horse to carry you around. Remember that scorched backside from the warmed bed. You'll want to make sure your clothes don't catch fire next. Servants swarm your chamber like bees, expertly pulling on your stockings. Yes, those medieval socks were a challenge, lacing your boots and adjusting your collars until you look presentable enough to face the court and hopefully not trip over your own hems in the process. The grooming routine can last hours, especially for noble women who had intricate hairstyles that required an army of attendants and more pins than a medieval dart tournament. And speaking of servants, some had rather peculiar roles. For instance, the groom of the stool was tasked with helping the king with his most private moments, yes, including the dreaded chamber pot business. It was a coveted position, not because it was glamorous, but because it meant intimate access to the monarch, which translated into political influence. So if you think your job has weird perks, try managing a king's toilet routine. Medieval windows, those narrow arrow slits, didn't help much when it came to privacy or lighting. Dressing by candlelight or the faintest sliver of dawn required patience, especially if your hands were trembling from cold or nerves. There's a scholarly debate about whether these cramped quarters were meant to keep nobles humble, or just because they hadn't invented bigger windows yet. Either way, fumbling your fine robes in near darkness was part of the charm. If you're lucky, your chamber boasts a warming pan, basically, a metal pan filled with hot coals that servants shove under your blankets to make the bed less of an icebox. But these too were a gamble. One wrong move and you'd wake up looking like a medieval s'more. Stories abound of nobles who had to sit on scorched seats, which no amount of royal dignity could hide. Once clothed, you're faced with another conundrum: the hair. Medieval hairstyles were elaborate, especially for women. Braids, veils, jeweled pins, and heavy wigs were the norm. Think of it as medieval cosplay, but with a higher risk of helmet hair. Keeping all that in place required skill, and if a gust of wind caught you in the castle courtyard, well, better hope no one caught you in a bad hair day. Historians still argue about how much time nobles really spent on their appearance versus how much is exaggerated by surviving inventories and etiquette manuals. But one thing is certain: looking good was a serious business, even if it meant enduring hours of discomfort and risking coal burns. The morning ritual wouldn't be complete without dealing with the chamber pot, your medieval toilet companion. You might not be thrilled to hear that many pots were emptied out the narrow windows, directly onto the castle grounds below. This explains why shouting "guard below" became a necessary warning for unsuspecting peasants walking the castle walls. Imagine trying to maintain your royal composure, knowing the air around you occasionally carried unexpected gifts from above. As you finish dressing your hands, still slightly smelling of ash, and your clothes heavy from layers and lingering smoke, you prepare to descend into the castle proper. The day ahead demands not only your regal bearing, but also a thick skin, both literally and figuratively. Because if there's one thing medieval life teaches you, it's that even the highest-ranking lords aren't spared from the awkwardness, smells, and minor disasters that make history so wonderfully human. From the chilly chamber to the bustling halls, your morning routine sets the tone for the chaos and responsibility to come. And trust me, surviving this first act of the day is a victory worth savouring until the next challenge appears, which, spoiler alert, involves navigating the castle's dining room and its peculiar social minefield. Breakfast in a medieval castle. Imagine a royal feast that would make today's food critics weep, probably from the smell before the taste. You might think that being a lord meant endless platters of roasted boar and exotic fruits, but prepare yourself, because medieval breakfast was a wild mix of haute cuisine and whatever didn't rot first. So, grab your trencher, a rock-hard slice of stale bread doubling as your plate, and steel yourself for a morning meal that's as political as it is pungent. First off, let's talk hierarchy at the breakfast table. The king doesn't just get first dibs, he's practically the food dictator of the morning, claiming the first, second, and every choice morsel thereafter. Meanwhile, the castle staff is left with pottage, a mushy concoction of vegetables boiled until all flavour and dignity have fled. It's the medieval equivalent of being told, "Here's your salad," if you can call it that. But there's more to this than meets the eye. That stale trencher you're using as a plate, don't be fooled by its rock-solid nature. After a few days of service, these bread plates were handed off to the poor, who probably needed teeth tougher than armour to chomp through them. Think of it as medieval recycling with a hard bite. Dining etiquette, or rather the lack of it, deserves a special mention. A surviving guide from the period warns nobles not to wipe their greasy hands on their beards. Yes, this was a serious enough problem that it required documentation, because if you think about it, who wouldn't want their face rubbed with a layer of stew and mead residue before facing the day? Apparently, even medieval lords had to be reminded not to look like a walking, talking kitchen rag. Seating at the table was its own political battlefield. The closer you sat to the lord or lady of the castle, the higher your status and the better the chance you'd get the choicest cuts of meat. Get relegated to the far end and everyone knows you messed up. There's a record from a 14th century castle about two knights who, after an argument about food quality, got into a duel right at breakfast. Spoiler alert, medieval food fights were as real as they were messy. Speaking of food quality, medieval castles, surprisingly, had food safety standards. One knight's diary warns about feeding green meat to peasants, first a rule that sounds both fair and terrifying. Imagine being the unlucky peasant getting the oops, this might be bad portion, while the nobles feast on fresh roasted meats and fruits that were sometimes so exotic you wonder if they were smuggled in by dragons. The aroma of the great hall during breakfast is something to behold or maybe to flee from. You've got unwashed bodies mingling with the smoke from open fire pits and whatever animals managed to sneak in during the night. That unique medieval perfume was a heady mix that modern perfumers would have nightmares about replicating. Floors were sticky with layers of animal dung accumulated over decades, so much for your barefoot morning stroll. Walls weren't much better. Stone walls in damp climates sweat creating perfect conditions for mould and mildew. To combat the chill and damp tapestries were hung, but these weren't your Instagram-worthy decor. They were rarely cleaned, making them cosy homes for bugs, mice, and mysterious medieval life forms. Think of your dining room as a micro-ecosystem of medieval biodiversity. Historians still argue whether the dankness and damp were accidental side effects of castle construction or intentional features designed to keep inhabitants tough and resilient. Regardless, every bite of breakfast came with a side of musty tapestry, ambience, and a dash of medieval adventure. As you maneuver through this minefield of smells, tastes, and social posturing, you might wonder how anyone managed to eat without gagging. The answer lies in copious amounts of ale and mead, which, while not exactly gourmet, helped wash down everything from crusty bread to questionable pottage. Once the feast winds down, and the great hall fills with new smells, some pleasant, many not juicy, you brace yourself for the day's challenges ahead. But first you'll need to navigate the delicate politics of the dining room, where one misstep in seating or table manners could cost you more than just a mouthful of stale bread. Remember that scorched bed warming incident? Well, your morning is only getting hotter figuratively this time. Next, you'll dive into the behind-the-scenes of managing your sprawling estate, where dealing with peasants' disputes and disgruntled staff is an art form in itself. You might think being a medieval lord means lounging all day with a goblet of mead and a court jester making jokes about your favourite hunting dog. Well, think again. Running a castle is like trying to manage a medieval reality TV show, where every episode features fiery arguments, ridiculous demands, and unexpected plot twists, except your cast includes peasants, knights, merchants, and that one overly dramatic cook who insists the stew was ruined by a cursed onion. Your day kicks off with managing disputes that could rival the most heated modern courtroom dramas. Complaints fly in faster than arrows during a siege. The baker's bread is so hard it could be used as a weapon. The blacksmith refuses to make dragon-shaped door handles again, and those two maids are fighting over who has to clean the Lord's prized goose after it fell in the moat. Yes, these are actual complaints from castle records. You quickly learn that even the smallest problems can snowball into full-blown crises if not handled with the skill of a diplomat and the patience of a saint. Staff management is a full-time job too. You're responsible for everything from ensuring the cook doesn't burn the meat again to making sure the stable boys don't let the horses out for an unauthorized midnight gallop. There's a special kind of chaos that comes with managing a crew, where the line between servant and family blurs into a mess of tangled loyalties and dramatic grudges. And just wait until you hear about the gong farmer, the unfortunate soul who cleans the castle's toilets at night. Yes, that's a real job title, and rumour has it they were paid better than some craftsmen. Imagine negotiating salary raises for the guy who spends his nights scooping, well, you get the idea. One of your biggest headaches, handling the endless paperwork and legal wrangling over land taxes and peasants' rights. Feudal law is complex and as twisty as the castle's dungeon corridors. When a serf claims his neighbour's pig wandered onto his land and trampled his crops, you must arbitrate without letting the dispute escalate into a full-blown vendetta. And don't forget, peasants pay rents and taxes that keep your estate running, so maintaining a delicate balance between firm lord and benevolent ruler is essential. Too harsh and you risk rebellion. Too lenient and your treasury looks emptier than the castle wine cellar after a feast. Then there are the merchants, those crafty traders who bring in everything from spices that make your tongue tingle to fabrics so fine you'd swear they were woven by elves. But beware, many are shrewd negotiators, sometimes trying to sneak in expired goods or inflate prices like they're competing in a medieval version of The Price is Right. You've got to keep a sharp eye on their wares and a sharper tongue to keep your coffers safe. Historians still argue whether medieval lords actually enjoyed this level of micromanagement, or whether chroniclers exaggerated their burdens to make nobility seem more relatable. Either way, juggling these responsibilities without a smartphone email or even a proper calendar sounds like a feat worthy of legend. You're also the ultimate HR manager, handling staff disputes that by today's standards might seem downright absurd. Imagine mediating an argument where one cook refuses to work with the baker because John's bread is as hard as the castle walls, or breaking up a fight over who has to clean the Lord's hat after it went for an unexpected swim in the moat. And just when you think the day can't get more chaotic, there's always the matter of educating the children, your own and those of visiting nobles. Trying to teach young Lord William proper table manners is an uphill battle, especially when he insists on using his sword to cut cheese. At least he stopped juggling the bread roll's progress. Despite the madness, being in charge means wielding immense power. But with that power comes the constant reminder that you're the linchpin holding together a delicate social ecosystem where one wrong move can lead to unrest or scandal. Managing budgets that would make modern CEOs sweat, overseeing supplies that must last through harsh winters and sieges, and keeping the peace among a diverse and sometimes unruly household demands more than just a fancy title. It requires cunning resilience and a wicked sense of humour. So as you finish sorting through a pile of petitions and fending off the latest complaint about the cook singing, which might count as an attack on the castle, you brace yourself for the next challenge of the day, ensuring your fortress can withstand any assault. Because in medieval times, it's not just about looking good and keeping the peace. You've got to be ready to defend your kingdom with rocks boiling oil and an arsenal of bizarre weapons. That's a story for the next section. You think your morning commute is rough? Try being the guy responsible for defending a castle with nothing but boiling oil. Rocks and sheer panic. Welcome to the glamorous world of medieval castle defence, where every day is a crash course in chaos theory and impromptu engineering. You're the Lord, yes, but also part-time siege expert, part-time alarm system, and full-time master of don't drop that boiling oil. First off, let's talk about murder holes. No, this isn't the latest medieval thriller series. It's exactly what it sounds like: holes in the ceilings, above entryways where your soldiers get to practice their medieval home defence skills by dropping everything from rocks to yes barrels of boiling oil onto unsuspecting attackers. Imagine being on the receiving end of that and trying not to scream, "Why didn't I just stay home and binge watch tapestries?" The castle's account books from 1312 even list 2 barrels of oil used in one such defence, because nothing says, "Welcome to my castle," like a hot oil surprise. Then there's the drawbridge operator. This poor soul has a single crucial job. Don't mess up the drawbridge. Sounds simple, right? Think again. Historical records describe several catastrophic blunders, including raising the bridge too early and leaving your own soldiers stranded outside. Talk about friendly fire. One operator in a Welsh castle accidentally trapped half a cow in the raised drawbridge. The cow was unharmed, but created what the chronicle called an essential distraction, probably for the invading army, laughing their helmets off. Keeping your castle stocked is another beast entirely. Successful fortresses were judged not by their walls alone, but by their ability to outlast a siege. That means food, water, and supplies for everyone from the lord to the lowest scullery maid for months on end. Medieval lords had to balance between hoarding enough to survive and not turning the castle into a hoarder's nightmare, filled with expired mead and suspicious jars of pickled something. Speaking of mead, after all that stress of defence, you deserve to unwind, right? Well, medieval partying was a thing, but the ways they blew off steam might make you question your Friday night plans. Take jousting, smashing into each other on horseback with pointy sticks sounds dangerous enough, but the rules were as flexible as the knights' helmets. Archaeological evidence from castle sites shows a surprising number of healed broken bones from what historians call friendly wrestling matches in the courtyard. Imagine a medieval WWE, but with more chainmail and less choreography. Dice games were everywhere too, despite frequent bans by authorities, who clearly had better things to do than police gambling addictions. Castle gambling was so rampant that some lords had to issue proclamations forbidding dice games during official functions, because nothing ruins a feast like a brawl over who won the last bet. And then there were the musicians, or rather the castle's very own medieval version of a one-person band that just won't quit. One account lists a musician's daily duties as playing during meals, prayers, work, another playing until everyone begged them to stop. The instruments were, let's say, quite inventive. One was called a bladder pipe, made literally from an animal's bladder. Classy. Historians still argue whether this relentless entertainment was torture, disguised as culture, or simply the medieval equivalent of white noise to drown out the smell of the castle latrines, which, by the way, were emptied right outside the walls, contributing to the castle's signature aroma. Just when you think the day can't get more surreal, there's the gong farmer, the official cleaner of the castle's toilets. Yes, a real job usually done at night to spare everyone else from the smell. Records show they earned surprisingly good wages, proving that even in medieval times, dirty jobs could pay well if you could stomach the work. Between dodging boiling oil, managing broken bones from jousting mishaps, and enduring never-ending music that sounds suspiciously like a cat in distress, the medieval Lord's Day was packed with unexpected duties. And this, dear listener, is only the halfway point of your royal adventure. Next up, you'll dive deeper into the lives of your knights and servants, discovering that being a noble doesn't mean you're exempt from scrubbing horse stalls or polishing armour until your knuckles bleed. But for now, take a deep breath if you can, and prepare for the hilarious, chaotic, and occasionally smelly reality of medieval servant life. You might imagine knights as glamorous heroes in shiny armour, gallantly saving damsels and jousting for glory. But reality check, being a medieval knight was less King Arthur and more extremely heavy metal fashion show, combined with endless chores, endless polishing, and enough bruises to make a boxing champion jealous. Meanwhile, the servants, their lives were a non-stop circus of cleaning, fetching, and surviving the accidental wrath of their noble masters. Welcome to the true hustle behind the medieval castle walls. Knights had their work cut out for them long before the first battle horn sounded. Training was brutal hours spent drilling in heavy armour that could weigh upwards of 60 pounds. Picture trying to do push-ups while wearing a small portable iron fort. One knight's diary complains about spending 3 hours polishing his armour, only to stand dripping wet in the rain for 6 hours during a royal ceremony. Talk about a lose-lose situation. I look good, but I'm soaked, he grumbled. It's like the medieval version of getting dressed for the party, but the party is cancelled. Training wasn't just physical. Knights had endless ceremonies to attend, often requiring them to stand still for so long you'd swear their armour was slowly becoming part of the stone floor. If boredom were a sport, these guys would be Olympic champions. Then there were the squires, the unsung heroes or victims of knightly life. These young lads did everything from cleaning horse stables to polishing swords, often at the mercy of their impatient lords. There's a delightful complaint in a 14th century blacksmith's records. The lord wants dragon-shaped door handles again. Dragons don't even exist, but try telling him that. Talk about job stress. Squires also had to endure the chaos of medieval kitchen disasters. Broken swords bent in anger, spoons mangled by careless kitchen boys, and the constant fear of accidentally spilling mead on a noble's robes created a pressure cooker environment worthy of its own drama series. Servants weren't spared the madness either. The castle was a bustling hive of activity, with cooks shouting orders, stable hands dodging unruly horses, and chambermaids scurrying about like caffeinated squirrels. Their day often began before dawn and ended long after sunset, with little recognition beyond the occasional grumble from a lord displeased by a slightly burnt loaf. In addition to their labour, servants had to navigate the minefield of castle politics. Favour with the lord could mean better quarters or a swift exit to the dungeons. Historical documents reveal disputes over trivial things, like who had to clean the lord's shoes or carry the prized hunting hawk. It was a cutthroat world, where alliances were forged over spilled ale and broken broom handles. Historians still argue how much agency servants had given their status, but what's clear is that they were the castle's lifeblood. Without their tireless work, the entire noble operation would collapse faster than you can say drawbridge. Amidst this chaos, knights and servants occasionally found time for bonding, often through wrestling matches in the courtyard. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of numerous healed broken noses and black eyes, friendly reminders that medieval leisure was far from gentle. These bouts sometimes ended in laughter, sometimes in bruises, and occasionally in the nobleman's chambermaid demanding peace before someone lost a nose for good. Despite all the hardship, knights carried an air of prestige. But beneath the polished helmets was a man who just wanted a good meal, a soft bed if such a thing existed, and maybe a nap that didn't involve waking up with a scorched bottom. As the day unfolds, you witness the castle's formalities, grand ceremonies filled with pomp, pageantry, and enough awkward curtsies to last a lifetime. Behind the scenes, the politics of the court play out in whispers and side glances, where alliances are forged or broken over nothing more than a spilled goblet or a poorly chosen compliment. So after watching your knights prepare and your servants scramble, you start to understand medieval nobility wasn't just about titles and riches. It was an exhausting balancing act of maintaining appearances, managing chaos, and trying not to get trampled by your own horse. Next, get ready to experience the strange and wonderful world of medieval entertainment and how lords and ladies unwound after days filled with armour arguments and ale. Trust me, you haven't heard a bladder pipe until now. If you think medieval parties were all about fancy dresses and polite conversation, think again. Welcome to the medieval version of Let's Crank the Chaos Up to 11, where jousting is basically extreme contact sports. Musicians play instruments made from animal parts, and the rules of engagement are well optional. Tonight you're about to discover how lords and ladies let their hair down, or at least tried to without accidentally setting the hall on fire. Let's start with jousting. You might imagine two knights elegantly charging at each other with gleaming lances, gracefully toppling off their horses in slow motion. In reality, jousting was a spectacularly dangerous sport, where smashing into each other at full speed with pointy sticks was as common as broken noses and shattered helmets. The rules were flexible, to say the least. Archaeological evidence from castle grounds reveals an impressive number of healed fractures, suggesting these friendly bouts often ended with more pain than glory. Think WWE meets medieval mayhem, minus the scripted outcomes. But if you thought that was wild, wait until you meet the castle's musicians. These folks were the medieval equivalent of a never-ending soundtrack, tasked with playing through meals, prayers, work shifts, and pretty much anything else that required noise. One record humorously lists a musician's duties as playing until everyone begs for mercy, which, given the bizarre instruments like the bladder pipe crafted from an actual animal's bladder, sounds more like torture than entertainment. Imagine a kazoo on steroids with a splash of swamp gas. Dice games were everywhere, despite the fact that gambling was frequently banned by the authorities. Castle gambling addiction was so widespread that lords had to outlaw dice games during official events to prevent brawls and chaos. It's medieval Las Vegas, minus the neon lights, but with plenty of shouting and cheating. And then there's the gong farmer, the unsung hero of castle sanitation. This individual's job was to clean out the castle's latrines at night, a task so unpleasant it earned them surprisingly high wages. While you might expect medieval sanitation to be a smelly nightmare, and you'd be right, the gong farmer's pay proves that dirty jobs have always commanded respect, or at least compensation. Historians still debate whether the gong farmer's nocturnal hours were to protect the noble noses, or simply because nobody else wanted the job. The feasts themselves were a curious mix of opulence and odour. The castle's great hall would fill with the smell of roasted meats, fresh bread, unwashed bodies, and let's be honest, a dash of mystery, scents from the kitchen, refuse tossed outside. Between the smoke from open fires and the occasional stray animal that wandered in the ambience was a little less fine dining and a lot more wild jungle. Despite this, lords and ladies took their feast seriously. This was as much a political stage as a place to eat. Music, dancing, and games filled the evenings, providing a welcome escape from the daily grind of sieges and disputes. Yet even entertainment was not without its quirks. Medieval dancing could look like a complicated game of don't step on the heavy skirts, while dodging elbowing courtiers and jesters often pushed the boundaries of humour to keep spirits high, sometimes to the dismay of those less amused. Historians still argue about how much medieval lords truly enjoyed these festivities versus how much they endured them as social obligations. One thing is clear, the medieval party was never dull. Injuries from jousting, the relentless drone of bladder pipes, and the ever-present risk of accidentally swallowing a bug meant that even a night of revelry could feel like an adventure in survival. So after a day of armour polishing, managing disgruntled peasants, and dodging boiling oil, medieval lords had their moments of joy, albeit strange, raucous, and sometimes painfully awkward ones. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow's challenges await with a whole new set of bizarre medieval realities to face, starting with the curious and often creepy world of medieval medicine. If you think your doctor's office is intimidating, wait until you meet the medieval physician. Imagine a man armed with a cookbook that doubles as a horror novel, stocked with remedies that make modern-day snake oil look like a miracle cure. You're about to dive into the bizarre, often hilarious world of medieval medicine, where a fever might mean strapping a chicken's bottom to your head and hoping for the best. Spoiler alert, it rarely worked. Doctors in medieval castles fancied themselves as miracle workers, but their methods could be described as creative at best and utterly bonkers at worst. Bloodletting was all the rage because apparently draining you of precious blood was the way to restore health. Patients often left feeling dizzy and weak, which might explain why castles had so many stairs. Doctors believed a good climb was part of the cure. Some medical texts suggested stirring potions 3 times under a full moon for maximum effect, because nothing says science like moonlight rituals. The castle's medicine cabinet was a wild collection of oddities: dragon's blood, which was actually red resin, unicorn horns, probably narwhal tusks, or just fancy bones, and mummy powder. Yes, that's exactly what you think it is. These ingredients promised healing powers, but mostly added a spooky vibe to the apothecary. One castle's inventory even listed 3 unicorn horns, 5 dragon hearts, likely lizards, and a mermaid skull which suspiciously looked like fish remains. Dental care was no less adventurous. Medieval dentists believed in magical antiseptics, stirred under the light of the full moon, though it's questionable how much those treatments actually helped. At least you could rest assured that any toothache might be cured by a ritual that sounded like it belonged in a fantasy novel. Historians still debate how effective medieval medical practices really were, but the consensus leans toward not very. However, considering the alternatives, maybe a chicken strapped to your head was the lesser evil. You probably wouldn't want to ask what happened if you refused treatment. The answer likely involved leeches more bloodletting, or an angry herbalist wielding a blunt knife. The doctors, often called physicians to sound fancier, were respected but feared figures. Their medical textbooks read like a recipe book for medieval nightmares, filled with instructions that could turn even the bravest noble pale. You'd think a fever would be a simple matter, but no, it might require sacrificing a goat, applying poultices made of mysterious herbs, or chanting prayers while balancing on one foot. But medicine wasn't the only eerie thing about the castle at night. As darkness fell, the stone fortress transformed into a realm of shadows, ghosts, and tales that would make modern horror movies look like children's cartoons. Guards patrolled the corridors alone, wary of creatures from medieval bestiary. Books, night crawlers, bats, wall demons, mice, and shadow lurkers, probably cats. Ghost sightings were so common that guards filed reports describing their ethereal visitors, often commenting on their fashion choices. One guard complained that a ghost in the North Tower was wearing last season's tunic and suggested it update its wardrobe. The ghost, apparently offended, vanished in a huff. If that's not medieval sass, what is? The Night Watch had one of the creepiest jobs in the castle, tasked with keeping the peace in darkness, filled with real and imagined horrors. They lived in constant fear of demons and spectres. There's even a hilarious incident of a night guard spending money on holy water to ward off evil, only to discover it was the new stable boy sneaking midnight snacks. The castle jester immortalised the event in a ballad, which unfortunately became a favourite tune among the troops. As the castle slept, the real horrors lurked underground. Medieval dungeons were far from the Hollywood version of gloomy stone cells. They were overcrowded, smelly, and downright miserable. Prisoners, often debtors rather than criminals, were expected to pay for their food and accommodations, meaning jail wasn't exactly a vacation. One noble prisoner complained about his dungeon bill, 7 silver pieces for rat removal. Rats that, mind you, still lived in the walls and often joined inmates for meals. Some nobles even brought their own servants to prison, including food tasters, who quickly quit when faced with dungeon grub. Dungeon keepers were more like overworked hotel managers than terrifying jailers, constantly juggling prisoner complaints from drafty cells to unwanted real estate offers from fellow inmates. One keeper begged to be transferred to guard duty, claiming it was less stressful than dealing with daily prisoner demands. Despite all the darkness, life in the castle rolled on, full of absurdities and challenges. As dawn approached, you prepare to face another day in this stone fortress where comfort is scarce, humour is essential, and survival requires a thick skin and a sharper wit. Next up, the exhausting but oddly comedic routine of managing the castle's daily operations, from the highest tower to the deepest dungeon. Because in the medieval world, every day is a battle, sometimes against invaders, sometimes against spoiled bread. You probably thought jail was bad nowadays. Well, medieval prisons were like the world's worst vacation, where the welcome committee consisted of rats' stale bread and a draught so fierce you'd swear the stone walls were conspiring against you. Welcome to the dungeons, where your noble title counts for little, and your bedroll is a patch of cold, damp floor that could give you a permanent chill in places you didn't know existed. If you think prison food is bad today, imagine being a medieval prisoner, expected to pay for your own meals and rat removal. Yes, you read that right. One noble's complaint logged that he had to pay 7 silver pieces for getting the rats out of his cell rats that probably just moved next door afterward. Some of these dungeons were so grim that even the rats had a better social life than you, wandering freely and probably judging your cooking skills. And don't assume you're alone. Prison records show that many nobles brought their own servants into jail, including food tasters. One particularly finicky duke insisted on a food taster because obviously prison food poisoning was his biggest concern. His taster promptly quit after a week, claiming that testing dungeon gruel was not part of his job description. Who knew being a food taster could be so hazardous? Prisoners were a motley crew, but surprisingly, most were not hardened criminals. Debtors made up a large chunk of the population, stuck behind stone walls because they couldn't pay what they owed. Imagine doing hard time because you forgot to pay your taxes or missed your rent, not exactly the rock star crime of medieval times. Dungeon keepers, those poor souls tasked with overseeing the jail, were less cruel jailers and more beleaguered hotel managers. Their logs were filled with bizarre prisoner requests. Geoffrey wants a softer pillow. William complains about drafts, and one merchant is busy hawking real estate to his fellow inmates. It's like the worst Airbnb experience, but with guards and swords. One keeper even requested to be transferred to guard duty, claiming it was less stressful than handling Lord Percy's endless demands. You get the picture. Being a dungeon keeper was less about tyranny and more about dealing with a bunch of whiners who had nowhere else to go. The social dynamics inside the castle walls were surprisingly complex. Despite the grim conditions, prisoners organised their own little communities, bartering goods and services like medieval entrepreneurs. Some nobles even maintained their status behind bars, hosting private dinners with their personal servants and perhaps gossiping about the latest castle scandal. As dawn breaks, the castle stirs once again. From the highest tower where the lord surveys his lands down to the dankest dungeon cell, life resumes its relentless pace. The challenges of medieval life might seem endless, but there's a strange rhythm to it, a chaotic, unpredictable beat that keeps everyone from royalty to prisoner on their toes. Historians still debate whether medieval prisons were designed more for punishment or profit. But one thing's clear: if you ever find yourself reincarnated in such a place, bring a good pillow, some strong friends, and maybe a rat trap. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew. You'll face the daily madness of castle life once more, juggling feasts, fights, and the never-ending struggle to keep your kingdom standing. But for now, take a breath, because surviving a day as a medieval lord means you've already beaten the odds. And if you thought you were exhausted, now wait until you hear about the Night Watch's creepy rounds and the ghostly happenings that keep the castle awake after dark. When night falls in a medieval castle, things don't just get dark, they get downright spooky. Imagine being the poor soul tasked with the night watch, wandering the drafty corridors, armed with little more than a torch and a prayer, while every creak and shadow could be a ghost, or worse, the kitchen cat knocking over the mead again. Welcome to the eerie after-hours life, where every step might be your last, or at least your most embarrassing. First off, the castle's bestiary books were basically medieval monster manuals. You had night crawlers, which were probably bats but sounded way scarier, wall demons, aka mice with a Napoleon complex, and shadow lurkers, almost certainly the castle cats doing what cats do best, looking mysterious and knocking things off shelves at 3 a.m. The night watchman's job was part security guard, part ghostbuster, and part sleep-deprived philosopher questioning his life choices. Ghost sightings were so common that guards had to fill out reports describing what these apparitions were wearing because even medieval ghosts cared about their wardrobe. One guard famously noted a ghost spotted in the North Tower wearing last season's tunic, which he found very disappointing. When he suggested the ghost update its wardrobe, it apparently got offended and vanished in a huff. If that's not medieval sass, what is? Nighttime was also when the castle's jester shone brightest, or at least tried to. One amusing tale involves a jester who reenacted a stable boy sneaking midnight snacks and getting caught by a guard who had just spent a fortune on holy water to ward off demons. The jester composed a ballad about the incident that quickly became a castle favourite, much to the stable boy's chagrin. Nothing like a catchy tune to keep everyone awake and slightly paranoid. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and a healthy dose of fear. Guards worried about everything, from real ghosts to rats, from enemy infiltrators to their own overactive imaginations. Night watchmen spent long hours pacing the walls, eyes scanning the darkness for signs of trouble, muscles tense, heart racing, especially after that ghostly fashion critique. Inside, noble families tried to sleep through it, all often unsuccessfully. The stone walls amplified every footstep, every clang of armour, and every muffled snore. Meanwhile, servants tiptoed about, trying not to wake anyone, while keeping the castle running. It was a delicate balance of noise and silence, light and shadow, and occasional screams that probably came from too many ghost stories. Historians still debate how much the supernatural influenced medieval life. Were ghosts real, or just a convenient way to explain creaky old castles and bad smells? Either way, the stories and reports they left behind offer a fascinating and often hilarious window into the fears and humour of the time. So, as you wrap up your night watch, hoping to make it through without tripping over a sleeping dog or accidentally dropping your torch, you realise medieval nights were a blend of duty, dread, and the occasional laugh at the absurdity of it all. But the real horror wasn't the ghosts or the shadows, it was the dungeon below, where prisoners faced a much darker reality. In the next section, you'll descend into the depths of the castle to see what life was really like for those behind bars. And trust me, it's not a place you want to visit after dark. If you think your last vacation was rough, try spending time in a medieval dungeon. No sandy beaches, no spa treatments, just cold, damp stone walls, rats who've been around longer than you, and a constant chorus of grumbles that could wake the dead. Welcome to the castle's prison, where your noble titles don't grant you anything but a slightly less drafty cell, and maybe, if you're lucky, a rat-free corner. Being a prisoner in the castle wasn't just about losing your freedom, it was an expensive experience. Unlike today's jail, where you don't have to pay for your meals in medieval times, prisoners had to foot the bill for food and even rat removal. One particularly unlucky noble complained about a 7 silver piece charge for rat eviction services rats that, by the way, probably just moved to the cell next door, as if they were just relocating tenants. It was the original move-in fee, except nobody asked to live there in the first place. Some high-status prisoners had the luxury, if you can call it that, of bringing their own servants with them. One picky Duke insisted on a food taster to avoid being poisoned by dungeon grub. That poor taster quit after a week, citing job hazard as the main reason, which sounds like a polite way of saying, "I'm out of here." Imagine the conversations. "Nope, I didn't taste it. Nope, I'm not staying. Nope, don't send me back." Most prisoners weren't hardened criminals but debtors. People locked up because they owed money. It was less crime and punishment, and more that you've got to pay your bills, and now you're stuck. Being a medieval debtor was less about reform and more about survival and maybe bribing the right guard. Speaking of guards, dungeon keepers were less the stereotypical cruel jailers and more the world's most overworked hotel managers. Their daily logs read like a bizarre customer service diary, complaints about drafts, demands for softer pillows, and one merchant trying to sell real estate to fellow prisoners. It's medieval Airbnb, but with more chainmail and fewer five-star reviews. One keeper begged for a transfer to guard duty, claiming it was less stressful than dealing with the daily demands of demanding prisoners. That says a lot about medieval dungeon life. Life in the dungeon had its own strange social order. Prisoners bartered and organised their own little societies, trading good stories and sometimes plotting escapes. Nobles behind bars often maintained their status, hosting private dinners with servants who smuggled in better food. Dungeon life was grim, but not devoid of its own peculiar rituals and politics. Historians still debate whether medieval prisons were designed more for punishment, profit, or simply to hide away inconvenient people. One thing's clear: if you ever find yourself sentenced to such a fate, bring a thick cloak, a sense of humour, and maybe a rat trap. As dawn approaches, the castle awakens and life resumes its relentless pace. From highest tower to lowest dungeon cell, every day is a new challenge in the relentless drama of medieval life. Next, brace yourself for the final stretch, the exhausting, chaotic, and oddly humorous daily cycle that never ends, where survival depends as much on wit and willpower as on swords and walls. If you think surviving a day in modern life is tough, try doing it, while dodging chamber pots flying from above, roosters that act like they own the place, and servants who think that polish your armour means make you stand outside in the rain, looking shiny but soaked. Welcome to the grand finale of your day as a medieval lord, a chaotic blend of exhaustion, ridiculous mishaps, and moments of absurd glory. You've endured cold stone chambers, faced the wrath of boiled oil, defence navigated a dining hall that doubles as a political minefield, and survived more oddities than a court jester's wildest tales. Now, as night descends, it's time to wrap up your royal adventure and reflect on this wild ride called medieval life. Your body aches in ways you didn't know possible. That straw mattress, a medieval torture device disguised as bedding, calls your name like an old nemesis, promising restless nights and a backache that would shame any modern chiropractor. You step carefully across the cold floor, avoiding the latest surprise gifts from your less-than-tidy servants, the infamous chamber pot splashdown that somehow always manages to catch the unprepared off guard. You pull back the coarse wool blanket, bracing against the familiar chill that no amount of hot coals or prayers seems to dispel. As you settle down, your mind drifts over the day's highlights, the knight who polished armour for hours, only to stand dripping in the rain, the cook whose singing could shatter glass or sanity, the bladder pipe musician who played with such enthusiasm you feared your ears might revolt, and of course the ghost with fashion opinions so strong it vanished in a huff when criticised. Yet amidst this seemingly endless parade of mishaps, there is a strange rhythm to the castle's life, a beat that weaves chaos, duty, humour, and camaraderie into a tapestry as rich and textured as the worn tapestries hanging on the mouldy walls. It's a life where power comes with a hefty dose of humility, where every triumph is tinged with absurdity, and every challenge an opportunity to laugh or at least grimace at the madness. Historians debate whether lords truly relished this life or simply endured it with gritted teeth and a wicked sense of humour. But one thing is clear: medieval lordship was never about comfort. It was a relentless test of patience, leadership, and endurance, a role demanding not just strength of arms, but strength of spirit. As you finally lay down, the soft rustle of the wool, the flickering candlelight, and the distant gentle murmur of a bard's song mingle with the quiet creaks of the old stone fortress. The castle breathes around you, alive with stories of valour, folly, and endless human drama. You close your eyes and imagine the warmth of the hearth, the lullaby of the night, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring fresh challenges, new disputes, unpredictable feasts, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a moment of peace. Sleep embraces you slowly, softening the edges of the day's chaos, and inviting dreams that whisk you away from cold stones and boiling oil to fields of green and skies painted with possibility. You are, after all, a lord not just of stone and steel, but of stories and survival. Good night, brave soul. May your dreams be free of rats, rogue chamber pots, and ghostly fashion critics. And remember, if you ever find yourself back in these ancient halls, it's your wit, humour, and heart that will see you through, not just the sword at your side.